Where there were once 2 open scholarships for North Carolina, there are now 3. What's Hubert Davis going to do with them?
You are Locked On Tar Heels, your daily podcast on the UNC Tar Heels. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, it's Monday, May 15th, 2023. Welcome into the Locked On Tar Heels podcast, the only daily North Carolina show out there. I'm your host, Isaac Shade, and I want to welcome you to a brand new week of the show. So good to be back together. Hope you all had a great weekend. We're able to celebrate Mother's Day. For those of you who it's a tough day, my thoughts were with you yesterday because I know it is not a beautiful and wonderful day for everyone. For you everydayers, thanks so much for being with us. We got a great week lined up for you. You're not going to want to miss a second of it. If you're not already an everydayer, come join us. The water's fine. Very seriously, this community is growing all the time. No time like now to get in while it's kind of the off season for a lot of what people are tuning in for, which is North Carolina basketball or football. But man, there's other great stuff always going on, and the off season's a great time to catch up on previous shows and then get right in line with where we are at. Coming up on the show today, we're going to look at Leaky Black's time over the weekend at the G League Elite Camp, kind of leading into the NBA Draft Combine. A great athletics weekend in Carolina. Several teams moving on to some good things. But first, we do want to get into this scholarship discussion I mentioned off the top, because for a long time we've been having this conversation. All right, North Carolina's got 2 remaining scholarships. What is Hubert Davis and his staff going to do with those 2? Well, now that 2 became 3 because of D'Marco Dunn's transfer out just ahead of the transfer portal window deadline, which came last Thursday at 11:59 Eastern Standard Time. Let me catch you up because it's been a while since I've talked through the whole breakdown of how you get to these numbers. And I'm guessing that some of you might be wondering, how do you know there's only 2 scholarships? How do you know there's 3 scholarships? So let me talk through it briefly, and it'll be a nice refresher for those of you who are already aware of that. So in men's college basketball at the D1 level, you get 13 total scholarships. North Carolina utilized all 13 of those last year. So heading into next season, we know that Leaky Black and Pete Nance are out of eligibility. Boom. So that's 2 gone, down to 11. And then you also know that now 7 players have transferred out. 11 minus 7 is 4, meaning that there are 4 players from last year's team who are still on scholarship and will be playing this upcoming year. That's Armando Bacot, RJ Davis, Jalen Washington, and Seth Trimble. And then you add in the 2 incoming freshmen from the high school ranks. That's Simeon Wilcher and Zayden High. Now you're up to 6. And then you get the 4 transfers that have committed to come to North Carolina. That's Harrison Ingram, Cormac Ryan, Jae'lyn Withers, and Paxson Wojcik. And that gets you to 10. And that means there are 3 scholarships remaining. So that's where all that math comes from. Now, the question becomes, I said on Friday's show that we're going to talk about this today, and here we are. What is going to be the plan for those remaining 3 scholarships? Well, interestingly enough, even when we were thinking there were only 2 remaining, I had changed my thinking to saying, I really think that Elliot Cadeau think this is going to happen. And so even when there were only 2 scholarships, I thought that one of them would go to him, leaving Carolina with 1. So there's that. I'm going to hold to that because now you've even got more scholarships to play with. So I believe that Elliot Cadeau will have one of them, meaning that there are 2 available. Well, as I look at this roster, something key, something critical that has been missing the last several years, and this is going to sound like I'm hating on Leaky, but I ain't never hating on Leaky. Leaky's the guy. I'm hating on the roster construction. Since Cam Johnson, there has not been an elite shooting wing. That stabbed Carolina in the back a lot last year because between Leaky, who was a fine shooter, but that was not where he thrived, and Pete Nance, you didn't have the requisite shooting you needed from either of your two forward positions, from small forward on the wing at the 3 or for the power forward at the 4 position. And so for me, Carolina needs an elite shooting wing. Well, those couple things said, let's look at it this way. I want to propose 2 possible things that Coach Davis might do or could do, and then I will propose what I think that he's going to do. Number 1, if Coach uses all 3 of these scholarships remaining, and that's a big if, you do not have to use all 13. You can just keep one unused. You can give it to a walk-on, whatever you want to do with it. But you don't have to give all 13 to scholarship level players. In fact, there's a lot of wisdom in this new era of college basketball that says, you know what? We might not want to do that because we're not going to play all those guys and we don't want to get them frustrated and then they just leave. You know what I mean? So if Coach Davis uses all 3 of them, one we've already said, I believe, is going to Elliot Cadeau. Number 2, an elite shooting wing. The problem is there still one to be found in the transfer portal? Maybe yes, maybe no. More on that in a minute. But I think that is a key critical component for this team. If you think that's Paxson Wojcik, okay. If you think Harrison Ingram is going to blossom now that he is not the focal point and be able to shoot better, okay, I hear that argument. I'm just saying, there's not an elite shooting wing. And then the other if he was to use all 3, I would say Cadeau, an elite shooting wing, and thirdly would be some form of a front court player. Whether it's a 4 or a 5, I don't know. I don't care, frankly. It just feels like there needs to be more depth in the front court. That could be Jarin Stevenson, both committing to North Carolina and reclassifying from 2024 to 2023. It could be a transfer portal addition. Who knows what? But if Coach uses all 3, I think that's where they come from. In another scenario, I could see a world where Coach says, you know what? I don't want to utilize all of my scholarships on scholarship level players because I recognize that I'm a coach that just doesn't use much depth, right? We've found that to be true so far in Coach Davis's career. 2 years is not really enough to establish a career-long pattern. I wouldn't call it a small sample size anymore, but it's definitely not one of longevity. Right. And so I think this year will be telling, but he might recognize that and say, I don't want to bring guys in and then lose them because I'm not playing them. So in that case, I could also see a world where Elliot Cadeau comes in and then Coach gives the other 2 scholarships to walk-ons. I wouldn't put it outside. I think there's a greater than 0% chance that happens. And then thirdly, I think this is what is the most likely thing to happen, is that Coach Davis will use one on Elliot Cadeau, one on someone else, be it Jarin Stevenson, be it a better shooting wing, and then uses the third to give to a walk-on because of what we've already said, that if you're going to keep losing guys to the portal because you're not playing them, then let's just not get that bad press anymore, right? Like, just don't give that scholarship out to someone that's scholarship worthy. But also, when we think about all this personnel, I just talked about is there an elite shooting wing in the portal? Is there a backup big kind of question? Don't forget that over the course of the next 2-3 weeks or so, we will have guys opting out of the NBA draft that are currently in the NBA draft. Now, some of them will just return back to their previous school when that happens, but others have not only entered the NBA draft, they have also entered the transfer portal, so that if they decide to come back to school, they could transfer anywhere. That's like what Pete Nance did last year. So just keep your eyes on that. There might be guys that decide to come back to school that Carolina is able to use a scholarship on. Also, don't forget, grad transfers can still decide to enter because they are not bound by specific timelines. And when I say that, let me specify what I mean, because there are 2 different types of grad transfer. One is an unlimited transfer portal entry. One is bound by a certain timeline. So if it's a player that has just graduated undergrad and is looking to transfer to a different school to start grad school or postgraduate work for the first time, they can transfer at any time. The transfer portal is not closed to them. So, for example, Armando Bacot just graduated. If he wanted to go play somewhere else, he could and didn't have to enter his name in by that deadline. However, if you are already a postgraduate student wanting to transfer as a postgraduate student, it's actually an earlier deadline. It's May 1st instead of the one that we just had on Thursday evening. So those are the two differences. But just keep in mind, there could be grad transfers out there that we don't even know about yet that could decide to jump in because they want to do something. So that's where I think things will actually land, that Coach Davis will use 2 of these final 3 scholarships and give 1 to one of the walk-ons. Now, coming up, one of those guys who just left Carolina and freed up one of those scholarships is really starting out on his journey with the hopes of making the NBA, fulfilling a lifelong dream. You know who it is. It's Leaky Black. We're going to talk about how that process has been going at the G League Elite Camp in just a second. But first, this episode is brought to you by our friends at Built. Are you looking for a delicious snack, but you don't want all that sugar and calories? Then you got to try the best tasting protein bar out there. Are you like me and you're hoping to get some better and healthier snack options, but you don't want to sacrifice taste? Then seriously, I've got just the thing for you. Built Bars and Built Puffs. No, I don't know how, but somehow Built makes these bars taste amazing and still be healthy. What makes them so good? Well, for starters, they're covered in 100% real dark chocolate. Not to mention, these bars and puffs come in great flavor options like churro or peanut butter brownie. Meanwhile, they also have these amazing macros while still tasting good. Only 130 calories, just 4 grams of sugar, and yet 17 grams of protein. Perhaps best yet, now you don't have to wait for an order to come from Built.com. Why? Because you can just head on down to your local Walmart and get about a 4-count box, just to tide you over for the week. Or if you're a doomsdayer and you want to put some in your bunker, go get you a big old fat pack from Sam's Club. I'm just playing. But seriously, if you want a big old pack, go to Sam's Club and pick it up. Find you some Built, a proud sponsor of the Locked On Network. Friends, thanks for making Locked On Tar Heels your first listener watch every day. You everydayers, going to be a great week. Stick with us. Can't wait. Coach Pat Kilby with us on Wednesday. On Thursday's show, we're joined by the guys from Heel Tough Blog. And then on Friday, we got that mailbag episode coming up. So it's going to be a big, fun week. Make sure you stick with us. All right. Over the weekend, Leaky Black had been invited to the G League Elite Camp. And it's a little bit confusing because you might be aware that coming up this week is going to be the NBA Draft Combine, where there's close to 80 guys who have been invited to come and show up and get measured and play and let scouts for the various NBA teams get the real measurements and see up close and personal and the agility drills and all that kind of stuff. Well, before that happens, so over the weekend on Saturday and Sunday, there was kind of a lower tier evaluation camp heading into the NBA Draft Combine called the G League Elite Camp. And there were mid-40s, I believe it was 44, 45, something like that, guys invited to this, with several of them then having a chance based on performance or evaluation or whatever to be advanced on to stay in Chicago. Both events are in Chicago, to stick around and be part of the Draft Combine event. And so my plea is just give Leaky Black a look. This was the only Tar Heel invited to this elite camp and did well in the measurables. We'll talk about that in a second. Did pretty well, did Leaky Black things in the games that he played in 5-on-5 action. Had a really neat video. They interviewed some of the guys a little, a couple minutes long, and Leaky just had some really good answers, said some really great things. It was just very Leaky Black of him, and I love to see that. So if you haven't checked in on how things went for Leaky, let me fill you in on that, and then give you some news of where things are at. In terms of measurables, we often heard 6'8", 6'9", whatever. That's typically measurements with shoes. And as we found out from this event, his height without shoes was measured at 6'6", 6.25 inches. So 6 feet, 6.5, or not 6.5, 6 feet, 6.25 inches tall. His wingspan, we've often heard Leaky's right around 7 feet, and that proved true. 6 feet, 11.5 inches. Wild stuff. He ranked 11th of all 40 whatever dudes there in terms of total wingspan, but 10 of those guys ahead of him were all taller than him. And so that's great. You know, Leaky has proportionally big wingspan. You love to see that. His standing reach, 8'10". The 3-court sprint speed, he got 3.16 seconds, which was tied for third amongst everyone there. Great to see that. His standing vertical, so not max vertical jump where you can kind of get a run up, but just jumping up from a standstill position, was 33 inches, tied for fourth. And so Leaky's measurables doing a really solid job there. Played a couple games on day one on Saturday. His team won in overtime. Was not, unfortunately, a great shooting game for Leaky. He shot 1 of 7 from the floor, 0 of 4 from 3, and 1 of 2 from the free throw line, although those 2 free throws coming in the closing seconds of overtime, and got the second one. So scored a total of 3 points, had 6 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, and just 1 turnover. So a very Leaky Black stat line. Just wish he could have hit a couple more shots. Played 23 minutes in the game. And while it wasn't a great shooting game, he stood out and was recognized consistently for his defense by the commentators, by people on social media, all sorts of stuff. In fact, had a couple steals in the closing, like 10 seconds of the game to help seal it for his team. Marquise Noel, who was part of that big Kansas State run, went off in the Sweet 16, if I remember correctly. Leaky was put on him in that like next to last possession for Marquise Noel's team. It's kind of like when Coach Davis has put Leaky on Kihei Clark, just Leaky on a little tiny dude. And of course, Leaky was stride for stride with him, forced a turnover as Noel was trying to get a tying or go-ahead shot in the closing seconds. Leaky got fouled after that. That's when he hit that 1 of 2 to put his team up by 3. And then as the opposition tried to inbound to get a last-second shot, Leaky got a steal on that one too. And so literally won the game with what he does best, with defense. You love to see it. Love to see Leaky getting recognized for that. In his second game on Sunday, by the way, I should say he started in both of these games, played 16.5 minutes, 1 of 2 from the floor, 2 points. Didn't attempt a 3 or a free throw, 3 rebounds, 1 assist, 3 steals, and again, just 1 turnover. So Leaky doing Leaky things all weekend. It was interesting. I'd never heard him talk about this, but there was a video where he was asked who would be an NBA comp for him right now. And he said, Herb Jones, who's an Alabama product, who was known at Alabama for his defense first and foremost. And then also he said Cam Johnson. And so obviously Cam is ahead of Leaky in 3-point shooting, but you see some similarities there. And so Herb Jones as a primary defender has really made a place for himself in the NBA. And so Leaky could do the same. Now, at the end of this is where I have to give you some sad news. On Sunday night, in fact, just a little bit before I recorded this, Jonathan Givony, who does kind of recruiting work for ESPN, you might see him as @DraftExpress on Twitter, heard through a source who the guys moving on from the elite camp in sticking around for the NBA draft combine would be. There were 8 of them, and Leaky wasn't on the list. Unfortunately, I hate to say it. So it doesn't sound like at this point he's going to be able to parlay his performance at this camp into an NBA draft combine invite. And so the next step, if I'm thinking through it correctly, would just be an invitation to camp for one of the teams and prove his worth there. He'll continue to work out with teams. As we've talked about, he's worked out for the Celtics and the Warriors. There will be others. And hopefully you just got to get one team to believe in you and get you to stick around. And so there were those 8 guys who were moved on, 2 guys from Clemson, Hunter Tyson and PJ Hall, Janai Broom from Auburn, Sir Jabari Rice from Texas, and Kendrick Davis from Memphis, a couple others. Interestingly, Marquise Noel didn't get advanced on either, and several other names you would know. And so there's always great college basketball players who just have to force their way into the NBA, basically, and that's going to be Leaky. Well, got some fun wrap-up things that happened this weekend. Several other sports taking place, some athletic teams doing well, graduation, other things happening. We're going to talk about that in just a second. All right, you might have seen that graduation was this weekend. Maybe some of you were even there at graduation. If so, I know that's always a neat event to see people moving on into their next stage of life. And in my other job as a professor, I had my school's graduation this weekend. And man, you just see these young men and women you've poured so much of your life and training and learning and experience into, that it's just such a bittersweet moment. It's like something I talked about on the show several weeks ago, where you've literally trained them to leave. That's what you want them to do, but it still hurts when they go. And so that's what graduation always is for me. Anyway, it was great to see a picture from Carolina basketball on Twitter of this whole host of Carolina basketball folks who were either in the ceremony or just there. And so this picture was Coach Davis in the middle. Armando Bacot was in the picture, having graduated. Jackson Watkins, Justin McCoy, Dewey Ferris. Great to see all those guys getting their undergrad degree. Brandon Robinson was in the picture, getting his graduate degree, as was manager Kirsten Steinbacher, also getting her graduate degree. And so congrats to all of these people. Great to see them achieving this. We so often talk about when we talk about transfers or why somebody stays, we rarely, and hand up, I need to do more of this, talk about the academic side of it, being a factor in a student sticking around or staying in college or whatever it may be. And so you love to see these young people seeing it through, because man, it's hard work, such hard work to graduate college, and just such an honor to see them achieving such big things. Next, this is kind of just a quick thing. You might have noticed that the movie Air is streaming on Amazon Prime now. So if you have a Prime membership and you haven't seen Air, which I somehow haven't yet, I guess it's because I've got 2 kids and I record 2 podcasts every day and have another job. Maybe that has something to do with it. So my wife and I are going to sit down and watch it here sometime this week. But if you haven't had a chance to watch it yet, or if you want to watch it again, there you go. It's on Amazon Prime. All right, let's get a recap of some sports action that happened over the weekend. On Friday's show, we talked about how the baseball team had won in dramatic fashion on Thursday night over NC State. And apparently it was good news for Coach Scott Forbes, because on Friday it was announced that he was signing a 5-year extension to take him through the 2028 season. And so my kind of take on it on Twitter was, man, good things happen when you execute a walk-off suicide squeeze against NC State. So keep doing that, Coach Forbes. In all seriousness, congratulations to Coach on this extension. Courtney Banghart for women's basketball just got one. You know, you just love to see coaches sticking around and being pillars. Anyway, that is not where the good news started and stopped for baseball this weekend, because it was not dramatic on Friday or Saturday. Carolina sweeps NC State with a 9-3 victory on Friday. Not particularly close. The Tar Heels were up 6-0 after 6 innings and held on to win 9-3. And then on Saturday, won 12-2. This one was even less close. The Tar Heels scored 11 of those runs in the first 5 innings while shutting out NC State in those 5 innings. And in fact, they scored in each of the first 5 innings with 3 runs in the first, third, and fourth. Bats coming alive at just the right time. You love to see it. In some ways it might be a little too late for this season. Carolina's down 4th in the Coastal, but does have one more ACC series coming up. Anyway, before we move to looking ahead at that, this was Carolina's first ACC series sweep of the season. You love to see that. It was their first sweep of NC State since 2018 and their first home sweep against NC State since 2006. And so good things happening at the Bosch this weekend. Anyway, as I said, the Heels are 4th in the Coastal, traveling to play Clemson this weekend, who by conference record is the 2nd best team in the ACC. So massive work ahead for the Tar Heels, but can climb a little bit in the Coastal standings, hopefully, if they would go get another sweep. Why not? Also have Coastal Carolina midweek this week. On to tennis. Some good news and some sad news. Let me just quickly say the sad news, and then we can talk happy. The men's tennis team was in the Elite 8 in Austin, Texas, facing off against the overall number 1 seed Texas Longhorns. Carolina was number 16, and unfortunately, they were swept by the Longhorns 4-0, so they end their season just shy of making the Elite 8. I start there, though, because then the women on the other side, great news there. On to the NCAA championship starting midweek this week as they beat Florida. And Florida, again, coached by Tar Heel alum Roland Thornquist, a 4-1 victory over the Gators. Now, it wasn't without some game pressure, which the women's tennis team hasn't had to face too terribly much of this season. They had to come back. They lost the doubles point to the Gators, which that in itself was stressful. Gators won at 2 doubles. Carolina won at 3 doubles, and it all came down to 1 doubles, which went into a tiebreaker that Florida was able to win. So heading into singles, Carolina's down 1-0 and has to win 4 of those 6 singles to move on. Well, here's the great news. Here's the response that Brian Calbas's team had after dropping that doubles point. They didn't lose another set to Florida. They won 4 of the singles, and in the 2 that were unfinished, Carolina had won the first set and was leading in the second. So, I mean, you put all of that stress to bed by just quickly knocking it out of the park in singles. So you'd love to have swept, but hey, you win, you move on to the Elite 8, to the NCAA championships. Great work by the ladies there to come back from being down 1-0. So the Elite 8 playing those same Texas Longhorns, but the women's team on Wednesday, 5 p.m. Eastern time. It's at the USTA National Campus in Orlando, Florida. So a little bit of a measure of revenge to enact here, because we just talked about the men, losing to Texas. Also, you might recall that the women lost to Texas in the Final Four last year before the Longhorns won the national championship. So it's time to get back on that. Now, of the 8 remaining teams on the women's side, it's 7 of the 8 top national 8 seeds. So it's teams like all but one of the teams. The only seed that's not remaining of the top 8 is the number 6 seed. And I bring that up because that number 6 seed is a team that hails from Durham, North Carolina. And they're gone, beaten out by UCLA. So, P.S., I'm going to be out of town later this week. My wife and I are going to New York just for a quick vacation. And so those shows, Thursday and Friday shows, are going to be pre-recorded. So I'm not going to be able to discuss the results of tennis in real time, but we'll catch that next Monday, hopefully celebrating some massive wins for the Tar Heels. All right. Last bit of news, women's lacrosse is still in action as well. The NCAA tournament for women's lacrosse started this past weekend. You might recall we had said Carolina was the number 4 overall seed. They beat Sacred Heart 16-5 on Friday. And then number 17 seed Richmond 16-12 on Sunday, both there at home. Now, the Tar Heels trailed Richmond 8-7 at halftime, but then outscored the Spiders 9-4 in the second half to move on to their own Elite 8, which they will also host on Thursday. So Denver, number 5 overall seed, is coming to Chapel Hill Thursday, 5 Eastern on ESPNU. So you can check it out there. You probably don't even have to go find it on the internet because you can watch it on your TV. Make sure you're cheering on all these great Tar Heels athletics teams. Hey, well, that's it for Monday's show of Locked on Tar Heels. Thanks so much for joining us to kick off another great week. If you would, go leave a review on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else you can find a place to leave reviews. 5 stars, leave some fun comments. You can follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Heels. Follow me at Isaac Shade. Would love to have a conversation with you there, or through email, lockedontarheels@gmail.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe, smash the like button, and leave a comment on the show. What do you think the Tar Heels are going to do with those final 3 scholarships? Well, folks, it's always a great day to be a Tar Heel. We'll be right back with you tomorrow, but until then, peace.